Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. You know, there's a lot of stories out there in the UFO literature with regards to alien abductions, where a lot of people who say they got abducted by aliens, at first they are completely, absolutely terrified, but then the aliens do something to them, touch them, relay some sort of mental telepathic message, and the next thing you know, they're feeling just fine, the abductees. There's nothing wrong. They're calm and cool and collected, and everything's going to be okay. It's some sort of artificially induced drug, or apparently, who knows what they're doing. But there's so many different cases like that. So basically, what happens here is like these beings, they treat the human race like we're guinea pigs for whatever purpose, for their experimentations, for their hybridization program or whatever it is. They do their examinations and their medical procedures on us, and they calm us down artificially and then set us back on our ways. And a lot of people who have this experience, they'll tell you that, well, it was really eye-opening and a pleasant time, and I didn't mind it at all, and I'm glad that it happened. You have to wonder, I mean, were they hypnotically induced into this way of thought for the rest of their lives? I mean, it's some sort of a suggestion made to their subconscious where they just think this, and it's okay. That's how I feel about it. I think that, I think it's wrong. I mean, even despite the fact that some people who get abducted by these creatures say that it was a pleasant experience and that they're glad it happened, or they're glad it's still happening. A lot of other people say they don't like it at all. I think it's wrong on many different facets, because it makes us it makes the human race look like a bunch of guinea pigs for these things, for these creatures, whatever their purpose is in abducting us, and it's not good. I don't think it's a good thing. Anyway, we'll get into all of that later. I have a couple things to talk about. I have this case that occurred actually in 1989 on this date, November 7th, and this was something that was posted by Jeff Knox. It's a very interesting alien abduction case, and one of the things that one of the facets of that case is the fact that one of these two women were abducted as they're driving back from Colorado to Kansas City, and one of the women claimed that it was, that she didn't have a problem with it. After the fact, when she was hypnotized, they had lost time and all that, and then when it was over, she was okay with it. You hear that a lot. You have to wonder how something like that happens. But first, I want to talk about some news with regards to Lue Elizondo and that upcoming November 13th congressional hearing. Let's shoot over here. There's a subcommittee hearing, and it's on November 6th. This was on November 6th. There was a release, and it states here about a joint subcommittee hearing notice. It says, on Wednesday, November 13th, 2024 at 11:30 a.m., the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Government Innovation and the Subcommittee on National Security, the Border and Foreign Affairs will hold a joint hearing titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Exposing the Truth. The hearing will convene in room 2154 of the Rayburn House office building. If any members would like to submit documents, exhibits, or other materials into the hearing record, they may submit them through the committee's electronic repository at the GOP oversight clerks, blah, blah, blah. Members are encouraged to submit blah, blah, blah. Well, anyway, the news with this hearing is that it's not just going to be Admiral Tim Gallaudet, the retired Navy Admiral. It's not just going to be him speaking at this hearing. It's also going to be Lue Elizondo. Here's from Joe Murgia on Twitter, or aka the UFO Joe. He says, on November 5th, Spaced Out Radio tweeted that Lue Elizondo would testify in the congressional hearing with Mellon and Christopher Mellon, he's talking about, the former federal official, and Gallaudet on November 13th of this year. On November 6th, Vetted Podcast tweeted, Chris Mellon will testify at the November 13th UAP hearing. But then later on, Christopher Mellon he emailed Douglas Dean Johnson, who's a UFO investigator. He stated this. It says, "Hi Douglas, I agreed to testify in September and was very much looking forward to appearing. However, I have a long planned trip with my wife that conflicted with the new date. Very disappointing, as I have some information and ideas to impart that I think could have been helpful and of a considerable interest, perhaps another time." So Christopher Mellon was supposed to be there for this, and he's not going to be because of this trip. But Lue Elizondo will be there, and that should be very interesting. I mean, there was I hope there's a lot of questions asked. Maybe you could expand on some of the things that he states that he wrote about in his new book, Imminent. It's going to be very interesting hearing, to say the least. And at least we could say that we're still having hearings. I mean, there's still interest by our elected officials in getting disclosure. That's what this is all about. And it's nice to see that we're going to have Gallaudet and Elizondo there at the same time. That's as far. If there's anyone else going to be there, I have no idea. That's what we know right now, and I think that's pretty big. I think it's going to be pretty big to finally have Lue Elizondo testifying under oath about about this UFO retrieval and reverse engineering programs, and anything that he could say under oath is going to be very interesting to see this. So, of course, everyone in the UFO world will have their eyes focused on that hearing on November 13th, for sure. And I'm sure I will be doing something on this that day as well. So, yes, we have to keep that in mind. Anyway, now getting to this other story I want to talk about today, I think it's a very, very interesting alien abduction case that occurred in 1989. And this is what Jeff Knox, he publishes stuff on Twitter all the time. This date in history, on November 7th, this is what happened in 1989. On the same date as today. Today in UFO history, correlation of hypnosis data. November 7th, 1989, Goodland, Kansas. At 12:40 a.m., two women in their 40s are driving on Interstate 70 west of Goodland, Kansas, when they encounter a UFO and lose 2 hours of time. They experience anxiety, insomnia, irritability, and bewilderment as a result. Neither woman claim any interest in UFOs. They initially believed that they never left their car or observed anything further. Hypnotic regressions obtained independently reveal abduction scenarios with at least 40 correlations between their accounts. And that's the really interesting part of this story, is that these two women had experienced missing time. They saw a UFO. They remembered that part about it, but then they lost 2 hours worth of time. They showed up at a motel, and there was like 2 hours of time that was just gone, and they had no idea how. But then later on, and these people were not interested in UFOs. They didn't really care about it. But then they trying to figure out what happened and where the missing time went. And then eventually it took them to UFO researchers, and they were both independently hypnotized, and they both gave very, very similar stories. There was at least 40 different correlations in their accounts. And they encountered, they saw tall gray aliens as well as short gray aliens. One woman only saw a tall gray alien. The other woman saw two different kinds. Anyway, here was something from Richard Hall, the UFO Evidence Volume 2 that Jeff Knox had posted it. And this was just a little brief summary of this case. We'll go through this first, and then we're going to go into something else. A different document that talks about this case more in depth. And it says here, okay, Susan, she's 42, Jennifer's 49, November 7th, 1989, near Goodland, Kansas. Driving home to St. Louis from Aspen, Colorado, saw bright light and sky ahead at 11:40 p.m. After pacing car for about an hour, the object descended just ahead to within 100 feet, hovered over a field, a cone of multicolored light to the ground after they had stopped the car. The next memory was of driving away feeling exhausted and irritable. They stopped at a motel at 2:30 a.m., one with flushed face, the other very pale. The next morning, they discovered nearly 2 hours worth of missing time. Under hypnosis on November 24th, they recalled the car being floated into a disc-shaped craft where they were examined by 5.5-foot tall, slender beings with large heads, huge, slanted dark eyes, pointed chins, white skin, tiny nose, vestigial mouth, and 4 long fingers on each hand. Now, there's one error in that. They're saying that they remembered the car being floated into the craft. That's not what happened. They themselves were floated out of the car into the craft. So that was an error in that little, brief on this. And then it says onboard features of this craft: circular room with windows and panels, diffuse pink white lighting, narrow examination table, hieroglyphics on a wall, computer-like panels with blinking lights, a long corridor, an auditorium with seats, a floating platform with a railing. The onboard activities: examination under bright light, instrument-like dental pick used to place something in Jennifer's nose, preoccupation with fingers and hands, electrodes/wires attached. So, sticking something, an implant apparently up the one of these women's noses. Communication. Susan received telepathic messages about genetic coding, mutual advancement of both races, and a telepathic link with Earthlings. Jennifer recalled no clear messages, but vague impressions of their purpose being related to body chemistry. And then the end of it, the termination and return of this encounter. Both recall returning to the original room, floating back down to their car, escorted by two beings, and some kind of gesture that induced amnesia. And then the aftermath. Susan experienced anxiety, restlessness, and exhaustion, later job and lifestyle changes. She felt it was a positive, mind-expanding growth experience. Jennifer had severe nosebleeds, insomnia, flushed face, later content and functioning well, pursuing some new interests. Okay, now we're going to go to a more in-depth article about this case. This was from the Journal of UFO Studies, written in 1992 by John S. Carpenter for the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, or CUFOS. And we'll get into this a little bit here. It says, in the incident herein described, two women in their 40s reported that on November 7th, 1989, they were driving in a remote area of western Kansas when they encountered a UFO and then lost 2 hours of time. They experienced anxiety, insomnia, irritability, and bewilderment as a result of that night. Neither woman claimed any knowledge or interest in UFOs at all. They initially believed that they never left their car nor observed anything further. Hypnotic regressions obtained independently revealed abduction scenarios with at least 40 different correlations between their accounts. Many correlations were found with both published and unpublished research. A few interesting differences in the data from this incident suggest a contribution to the effects of personality and perception. And I'm going to shoot forward here. We'll read a little bit about the witnesses first. The witnesses, Susan is a 42-year-old businesswoman, happily married to an engineer with two children, ages 17 and 21. She and her husband live in a beautiful home in a suburb of St. Louis. She stated that she had never given the subject of UFOs any attention and had not read any books on the subject. In fact, she stated that she had never even heard of Betty and Barney Hill's famous abduction experience, nor ever read a science fiction novel. In the evaluation of the current author, she appears to be an honest, respectful, caring, strong, dependable, and candid woman with no psychological problems or history of such difficulty. She will look you directly in the eyes and state sincerely what she feels, needs, or thinks. She is a level-headed, open-minded person who seeks the truth with a calm but inquisitive persistence. And then also the second woman, Jennifer, is a 49-year-old widow with two grown stepchildren, ages 33 and 35. A college graduate with an MSW degree, she works as a freelance photographer in one of several business pursuits in the St. Louis area. She is somewhat shy and reserved, but yet independent and adventuresome. She stated that she has not read any books or seen any movies concerning the subject of UFOs. She appraises herself as a seeker of truth and understanding, admits she first needs an education in the field of UFOs. She is perceptive in noting small details and will keep thorough little journals at times. It was one of these logs that became a significant record of missing time. And now we'll get into the sighting. We're going to skip forward a little bit in this. So obviously, as you could see, these two women were, normal people, never even cared about the subject before. And here, all of a sudden, they get involved in it in a way that they'd never expected. And it talks about the sighting as reported by the witnesses. On November 6, 1989, these two women were on the road, pleasantly driving home to St. Louis from a conference in Aspen, Colorado. Jennifer was faithfully documenting her log and had just noted that it was 11:40 p.m. as they pulled out of a gas station in Flagler, Colorado. They had decided that they would drive to Goodland, Kansas before stopping for the night. Susan had been averaging 75 to 80 miles per hour on Interstate 80. Goodland was 72 miles away. Shortly after leaving Flagler, they caught sight of a bright object ahead of them in the east and slightly to the south, but very high in the sky. They noted that it was fairly stationary, but always stayed in the same location in relation to their car, despite noting that the moon changed position in relation to their car and the object. They clearly observed flashing colored lights on the object and occasional little movements. Then they both noted the rather sudden appearance of many smaller green lights near the brighter UFO. While Susan drove, Jennifer kept her eye on the skies for nearly an hour. Several times they pulled off the road briefly and dimmed all their lights so that they both could get a better view. During the last time that they did this, Susan noted that their car clock indicated the time was 12:40 a.m. Suddenly, they both saw a ball of light descend to within 100 feet of their vehicle, hovering over a field ahead and to their right. Below this ball of light appeared a V-shaped cone or soft, fluffy white light reaching toward the ground with colored rays of pastel pink, blue, and lavender. These beams seemed to establish the edges of the cone and crisscross slightly at the bottom point. The women performed a reality check at this point by verbalizing to each other what they were seeing, and they reported the same visual details. They also both noted black waves through the lower portions of the windshields, reminiscent of heat waves on the horizon of a desert highway. They felt the excitement and rush of adrenaline, only to next remember that they were pulling back onto the road and feeling strikingly different. Now they felt similar feelings of exhaustion, irritability, and a preference for silence and solitude. Quite an amazing and sudden transition in a matter of what seemed to be only seconds in time. Now this is when that's what. Let me just stop there for a second. Now that's where their abduction occurred. It was like they didn't miss it. To them, in their minds, right? Which is so amazing about the abduction phenomenon. I mean, in their minds, it was like nothing had happened. Like it was just you're going from one moment to the next moment, and you're in the car. You're still in the car the next moment. But really, 2 hours has just passed, and you didn't even know that you were taken out of the car. It's such a strange thing that happens to people who get abducted by aliens. And I always wonder, and I always talk about the incident that I had in 1994. With seeing one of these crafts up close. It was actually closer than the craft that I saw was within 20 feet. I mean, it was right there. I mean, it was just hovering there with absolutely no sound, big as a house, big as life. I was there with another witness, my friend Scott. We were fishing in the middle of nowhere at this pond in this place called Beach Mountain Lakes near Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And next thing you know, there's this object just comes floating out from behind some trees, hovers right over to our position, stops, and then goes backward it moved like in a triangular formation the way it came in, and then moved back out over the trees. But when it got right up close to us, and my friend shined that flashlight on it, that's when I said, we got to get the hell out of here, right? And we start throwing all our stuff in the back of his pickup truck. We were both in shock, and we're flying out of this place, driving out of there, and we had to stop because all these deer, at least 20 deer, were running away from the direction that thing just flew. And then we got out of there. But the thing that happened not long before this incident occurred was I had checked my watch. I was wearing a watch, and I had checked my watch, and I saw what time it was, and I knew about it. I was, by this point in my life, I was already interested in this because of my experience when I was a kid. I talk about that a lot. So I already knew about lost time. I heard about that, and I was wondering. Well, that was one of the things I thought of after this incident was over. Like, we drove out of that place, and we drove to I think it was a Dunkin' Donuts in Hazleton. And we were both shocked. We didn't talk the whole ride. As we got out of this place, we just were in shock. And then we go into this Dunkin' Donuts, and that's when I just finally broke the ice. I said, "That was a UFO, Scott." And he said, "I'm not saying anything. I'm not telling anybody." And I remember I checked my time at some point, and I remember it was like 10:30 or 10:15, something like that. And I was thinking, okay, I don't think we lost any time. But after reading something like this, I don't know. I really don't. Maybe I did. I have no idea. You have no clue. I mean, that's 30 years ago, 1994. I have no idea. I mean, you just don't. If that's how it is for when it comes to this, I mean, it's almost like you just lost. You really, literally, you could be. I could be sitting here doing this podcast, and then. In between a sentence perhaps, or at the end of a sentence, and then just pick it right back up with the sentence I left off. But who knows, two hours of time could go by in the middle of those sentences, and you feel like you didn't miss a beat, although you feel differently. You feel like all of a sudden, in this case with these two women, they feel irritable, and they're just drained, and all from feeling all excited to nothing. Now, and that's so strange to me. I've heard there's so many different stories like that, and it's just, oh my God. But at the same time, people will say, well, it's some people, not all of them, not all alien abductees will tell you that it's a good thing. It was a fun time. It's a great learning experience or whatever, and I just don't think, being taken like that against your will, is right. I just don't see how it is. There's no justification. But that's what seems to be happening, and that's been happening for a long time, for sure. Anyway, so they're all irritable. We'll get back to the story here. They stopped at a rest area only to find the restrooms closed, but they noted that that they could still see the bright object. When they drove on, they arrived in Goodland, Kansas just minutes later, which indicates that their closest encounter with the cone of light was just outside of their desired destination. This correlates with Susan noting that they had traveled approximately an hour at the time of their last pause to see the object more clearly. They also noted distinct changes in intensity in the lights around the motel as they arrived. Susan noted the time, and Jennifer documented their arrival in her log at 2:30 a.m. After they settled into their motel room, they noted startling changes in their physical appearance that matched their irritable feelings and fatigue. Jennifer had very red, flushed cheeks, which for her is quite unusual given her complexion. Susan was shocked at how devoid of color she appeared in the mirror, like death warmed over. At breakfast the next morning, they asked the waitress about any UFO sightings in the area and were informed of some near Wichita. Thomas H. Nichols, State Director for Kansas of the Mutual UFO Network, collects any reports concerning sightings in Kansas. He had no reports of UFO sightings in that remote area around that time. Okay, now we're going to skip forward here a little bit to the missing time puzzle. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Susan knew they would certainly need gas, because Jennifer had indicated that they had traveled until 2:30 a.m., almost 3 hours exactly. However, she was surprised to find that the gas gauge indicated that only about an hour's worth of gas had been used. Confused, Susan asked Jennifer to check the mileage on the map. She then learned that they had only traveled 72 miles in that 3-hour period of time. There is a time zone change approximately 13 miles further east from Goodland, but they had not entered that zone yet. They were not mistaken about the time because they remember the front desk clerk being rather surprised at how early in the morning these two women were traveling. Still puzzled when they arrived home in St. Louis, Missouri, Susan had her husband study a map to help solve their puzzling loss of time. He concurred that it had only been 72 miles. They then noted a fresh black streak on the outside of the driver's sun visor and also near the sunroof on the inside of the car, the potential significance of which will be discussed later. By this time, both Susan and Jennifer noted how irritable, jumpy, anxious, and restless they continued to feel. Jennifer reported sleepless nights until the hypnosis session on November 24th, 1989, brought her a significant amount of release and relief, resulting in the establishment of a sound, restful sleep pattern once again. Jennifer experienced problems with nosebleeds because of the UFO sighting and Susan's determination to resolve the missing time experience. She located a friend familiar with the UFO field. He then referred her through channels to Bruce Weideman, Missouri MUFON State Director, and then alerted me. Susan was requesting help, possibly through hypnosis, to learn more about what happened to them. And of course, they were hypnotized. But before we go on, I just want to look at some of these images here, some of the drawings that they have. This was the object that they saw near their car with the lights coming down. This was the one drawing on the left was the one by Susan. The drawing on the right was the one by Jennifer. As you could see, they both looked the same, the drawings. And then there were two other different drawings. Here was a drawing for Susan of the craft is on the left. So looks like your classic flying saucer. And then Jennifer's drawing of this object is on the right, and it looks very similar. And then here was the beings. The one that Susan only saw a tall one. She saw one of these tall grays. Jennifer remembers two different kinds, smaller ones, or I think one of them remembers two of them. I'm not sure. We'll get into the story a little bit here. Jennifer, I think Jennifer remembered two of them, and Susan only remembered one type. But there was Jennifer saw smaller gray, and of course, if you look at these drawings, they're the classic. That's what people see. That's what we have proof of too now, as I've been talking about on the show a lot. We have what looks like most certainly a short gray. That's what it looks like. That was captured in that Las Vegas alien video, and possibly, I believe, taller grays. If you look at that video closely, it looks like there could be a taller gray standing off to the right of the smaller one. Very, very thin looking, but I think that was a creature too. But I am absolutely certain I'm absolutely certain about the smaller one. There's no question about it. But I do think that I think the gang was all there in the Vegas video. This is what we've been dealing with, folks. This is what people have been seeing, and this is what we finally have captured on video, which proves that these things are real and that these abductions are real. Anyway, getting back to the article here. Okay, after the figuring out that there was something going on, and that they wanted help from people within the UFO community, they ended up getting hypnotized. And so the next part of this article talks about that. It says here, we're going to skip forward a little bit. It talks about the hypnotic method. We all know about that. And then and this is a very interesting article. Of course, I'll leave the link so you could read the whole thing. But anyway, here's a summary of the hypnotic sessions. On November 12th, 1989, just 5 days after this encounter, I began interviewing Susan. By chance, it happened that I was already in St. Louis on that weekend. I juggled my schedule to create enough time to properly interview her, tape recording her conscious recollections and performing a brief 1-hour hypnotic exploration into the period of amnesia. Susan was nervous, curious, cautious, and determined at the start of her session. The major aspects of her experience were recovered, but the flow of details indicated a need for more time and further investigation to fully document what seemed like memories. The need for absolute secrecy and no communication with Jennifer was explained and strictly emphasized. Susan stated she completely comprehended the importance and value of the verification process with Jennifer. She indicated that she would have no difficulty maintaining her silence because she and Jennifer were only acquaintances living miles apart with no regular communication or routine contact with each other. I made contact with Jennifer to invite her participation toward the relief of her insomnia and began by obtaining her conscious recall on a tape which she mailed to me. When we convened just 12 days later, Jennifer confirmed that Susan had not revealed any information whatsoever. Jennifer was curious but maintained that she never left the car nor saw anything further. She spent the next 2.5 hours under clinical hypnosis and was able to break through the veil of amnesia to recall a wealth of detail. Time distortion was evident in her statement that she believed she had only been hypnotized for approximately 15 minutes. While Jennifer was making drawings of her recalled experiences in another room, Susan was brought into the treatment room and placed under hypnosis for another hour and a half, which she believed afterward to have been only about 15 minutes. Although she reiterated the same basic recollections, she had much more time to notice additional details and explore the other aspects of her experience. And this is where it gets really interesting here, where they talk about the whole experience involving these creatures. To her own amazement, in her first session, Susan sees her car shrink beneath her as she floats silently upward toward the bright craft in the night sky. She next finds herself in a circular room encircled by geometrically shaped windows and panels and lit by a diffuse pinkish white light. She sees slender, non-muscular 5.5-foot tall beings with large hairless heads and tiny pointed chins. They have huge, slanted, non-blinking dark eyes which seem to communicate with her telepathically. Now, again, I think these 5.5 tall grays that they're seeing, I think, again, if you look at that Vegas alien video, it looks like there's one of these standing right beside a shorter one. And I think it's harder to see that taller one, but that's what I think it is. I have no other explanation for that. Whatever that tall, skinny thing is in that Vegas video, it looks like it's moving. And, of course, there's the smaller one right next to it, and so obviously I think it's easy to conclude that yes, there were taller ones, 5.5-foot tall one maybe, like what they're saying here, because that's what it looks like it might be in that video, and and the same description. This large hairless heads with tiny pointed chins. They have huge slanted, non-blinking dark eyes which seem to communicate with her telepathically. They have white skin and no apparent clothes as they glide about gracefully. She notes not much of a nose and no real use of a barely perceptible mouth. Yeah, the mouths on these things, you could hardly see them. Even if you look at that Vegas video, for instance, you see that short gray. That's the one I think is which is undeniable. We call him UB, the undeniable backbreaker. I mean, you could see that it's hard to see a mouth there. It's not discernible. Only right when it becomes, you see it getting distorted. You could see the auspices of a mouth. It looks like a circle, like a hole, like an O. Anyway, this was very interesting. She notes not much of a nose and no real use of a barely perceptible mouth. 4 long, slender, flexible fingers are seen on each hand. She is calmed by one touching her head while she watches Jennifer laying on a narrow table, fully clothed and undergoing some sort of exam. So basically, she's a little bit upset, but she's calmed when this thing touches her. See, again, it's artificially calmed. It doesn't mean that it's a good thing. I mean, that's the thing. Let's just stop here for a second. Okay, now say some murderers break into your house and they pump you up with some sort of a drug that makes you feel calm and everything's okay right before they go to kill you. It doesn't make it okay. Anyway, she's calmed by one touching her head while she watches Jennifer laying on a narrow table, fully clothed and undergoing some sort of exam. Susan doesn't believe Jennifer, now sedated, can see her from this position as Susan watches a dental pick-like instrument place something tiny in Jennifer's nose. Amazingly, this triggers a memory of an encounter just 2 weeks earlier when Susan recalled herself lying on a table with the same creatures around her, placing a small, flat, tissue-like object up her nose with a similar dental pick-type instrument. Susan remembered having the worst nosebleed of her life afterward during her garage sale. In the present encounter, Susan recalls receiving clear telepathic messages about genetic coding, mutual advancement of both races, and a telepathic link with Earthlings. Although very certain about these messages under hypnosis, Susan was amazed later to hear herself say things on the audio tape copy of the session. She also remembers seeing Japanese-like hieroglyphics on a wall of the room. In the second session, she recalled more about how the beings approached the car, instructed her to turn it off, and then floated them out of their seats. This may explain how a grease mark appeared on a sun visor, perhaps from a shoe brushing it. Now, I just want to stop there again. Now, it's so interesting. So the Susan remembers then under hypnosis that she was actually abducted 2 weeks earlier in her house. So see, this is happening to people. They don't even know it. And see, you have to wonder, okay, now this other incident that happens where she gets abducted while she's in the car with Jennifer, right? 2 weeks later, it's funny. You would think you can see what's going on here, obviously. What seems like the aliens, when they want you and they're going to find you, they must be putting some sort of objects in us. That's what these implants are. They must be who knows what the full purpose is of them, but they're obviously using them for some kind of tracking to figure out where we are when they want us again. And then sometimes what seems to be happening here is like that's why some incidents like this happen. I mean, this woman had been abducted 2 weeks earlier. Here, 2 weeks later, it's late at night. She's driving home with somebody else in the car, and then they're looking for her, and they track her down to this. They want her that night, so they have to do it right there. They don't want to wait. They don't want to wait till the next night. Apparently, they don't have no patience for whatever reason. They don't want to wait till the next night, maybe when she's sleeping, and might not notice it as much. Might not notice that there's missing time. You have to wonder about these things. Like it has me, reading this article, it makes me wonder about what happened to me back in 1994. I mean, because I had an experience when I was a kid. That's the only thing that I remember was this creature showing up in the room. I talk about that a lot. And then all those years later, on a fishing trip at night, right? Were they looking for me? Did something happen and I have no recollection of what happened whatsoever? It could be. Based on this, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about time. I didn't think there was any time missing that night, but I could be wrong. Maybe they knew I was thinking that. Maybe they put some sort of suggestion in my head for all I know, and I just walked away from that whole incident thinking I didn't lose any time. I have no idea. That's how these things operate. I mean, I guess in one way you could look at it and say, well, at least they're making you forget about it, right? At the same time, though, no, I don't like the idea that this could happen to me, even if I don't know about it. I don't like it. I don't think anybody should like it. But it is happening. I mean, this is real, folks. This story here is actually real, and we now have proof that backs it up. That's what people need to start getting into their heads. A lot of people are still out there wondering if this is just some sort of mass, craziness by certain people having aliens talking about alien abductions. No, it is not. It is not. It's really happening. It's happened for decades. I don't know how much it happens today. I really don't know, right? But it has happened. There's no question about it. I mean, Richard Dolan talked recently. I remember, I don't know, a few months back, he was talking about alien abductions. They're still happening. It still happens. These things do this. And you know, I don't think anyone should be happy about this. I know some people seem to be, but I'm not. I don't like it. I don't think that's right. I don't like the idea that the human race is getting treated like a bunch of guinea pigs. Anyway, continuing with this. Jennifer was calm, cooperative, and doubtful of recalling any further detail at the outset. However, Jennifer's session likewise found her also floating upward away from the car and into the night sky toward a bright frisbee-shaped craft. Once inside, she too reports a circular room lit by a diffuse reddish, orange, white light and encircled by geometrically shaped windows and panels. Jennifer not only sees the 5.5-foot tall, slender, non-muscular beings with an oversized hairless head and chalk-white face, which glided about effortlessly, but also some creatures with suction cup fingertips wearing hoods. All beings were recalled as having the large black teardrop-shaped eyes which taper around the sides of the head. She likewise notes hardly any nose or mouth. 4 long white fingers were seen on each hand. Jennifer also remembers seeing a long corridor, an auditorium with tiers of seats, and a floating platform with a railing. She then remembers laying on a table fully clothed under a bright light while some kind of exam takes place. She remembers not being able to see Susan at this point, just as Susan suspected. She remembers being calmed by an alien hand and losing track of time. Again, artificially calmed. She has no clear memory of a communication, but did receive some vague impressions of a scientific purpose involving body chemistry. Shortly after this encounter, Jennifer experienced a series of troubling nosebleeds. All right. See, this is what they've been doing to us. This is 1989. We're going back. I mean, it continues. I mean, so you have to wonder. I mean, I would imagine there's so many people out there that have that's been happening to them and they have no idea. No idea. A lot of people. I mean, because, I mean, I'm lucky somehow that I had somehow I was awake that night when I was a kid. Somehow I woke up. Something woke me up and caused me to wake up, and that whatever was going on, that thing in the room that night was probably trying to put me back out, and it did, and it succeeded eventually. It took 20 minutes, but I got conked out, you know, and it wasn't I wasn't like trying to fall asleep. I was wide awake, scared out of my mind. Next thing I know, I conked out. Nobody else in the house during that night. None of them. They wouldn't respond to my screaming and hollering for help. These beings really have power over us, folks, and they are real. It's time, and let's put it this way. I'm done with. I think from this point on, I'm done. You know, we've already proven with Mick West is a complete, absolute, you know, phony, absolute phony. You know, just recently I received a message, and I'll share this with you. Hold on a second. Let me pull it up. This was from Chris Lathrop. He's someone who's very interested in talking about the Vegas alien case, right? And of course, as you all know, Mick West, the debunker of our age, who constantly debunks anything and everything when it comes to UFOs, try to poo-poos it all, right? This guy's just lying to you. Lying to himself. He's lying to himself and everybody else, I think. I'm not even sure. Who knows, right? But just so you know, he was asked by Chris Lathrop a month or so ago, give or take, I don't know, if he would analyze the Las Vegas video, right? To either analyze it and see if he could debunk it. He refused. Scott Roeder asked him. He refused. Scott Roeder offered him $5,000. He refused. And now, this is what happened just recently. Chris Lathrop had put together a document that basically lays out all the information, like a big chunk of information. Actually, it was included in a new report that Scott Roeder put together too. It was a document that lays out all the facts related to the Las Vegas alien case from 2023. And this is what Chris just wrote to me a couple days ago. He says, "I posted my document in Mick West's Metabunk, and he banned me within 5 minutes." So he went and posted all of that information on Metabunk, you know, that's Mick West's website, and then he was banned. He was banned from the site, and that was taken down. Mick West doesn't want his followers to know about this. People, they're covering it up, folks. This is real. There are real creatures here, and they are doing these things. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Anyway, getting back to this article. Okay, they were both. So now the Susan, who had nosebleed after her incident 2 weeks earlier, when she remembered that, she didn't even know about that one until she got hypnotized for this incident with missing time while she was driving home with Jennifer. She had a nosebleed, and then Jennifer had a nosebleed. And anyway, continuing, it says, drawings were made independently after each session while recollections were fresh. Although their recall was not exactly identical, the overlap of their details yielded more than 40 correlations. The remaining details produced correlations with the data from other cases and other researchers. There were not a significant number of non-correlating aspects. Many different things were observed, but only a few seemed to be contradictory. The correlating overlap of these women's experiences is like the intersection of two sets of items. The intersecting like experiences are approximately 90% congruent, roughly 3 contradictions out of 45 comparisons. The items not in the intersecting set are different, but not in contradiction to each other. This is because the women noted different things, not the same things differently. For example, number 1, Jennifer felt they were both on a floating platform with a rail. Susan remembered 2 floating platforms, one for each of them. 2, Jennifer first recalled an oval glass table on which she felt like she was lying. Susan saw the more typical skinny gurney table. Later, in another session, Jennifer described the more common pedestal table. And then 3, Jennifer felt they descended back to the car on one of the floating platforms. Susan swears they were just floating down through the air. The feeling was the same, but visual recollections differed. These minor discrepancies probably represent, in light of the many positive correlations, the expected imperfect nature of memory. Originally, it seemed that they might be describing the same creatures somewhat differently, until it became apparent that Jennifer was actually observing more than one type of creature. One has to be careful not to presume a contradiction when a different set of observations may actually exist. And then there's a lot more to this article. There's a post-session responses, and there's a lot more to the article, but you get it. But another interesting aspect to this was the fact that they saw the fingertips. So Jennifer noticed on the fingertips there were like suction cups. And isn't that so funny? I remember Glenn Dennis, the mortician from Roswell, who talked to a nurse who was all upset about seeing dead alien bodies brought in, and she drew pictures for him, and they showed little suction cups on the fingertips. Isn't that funny? In 1989, I'm not sure if that story would have been widely known in 1989, that particular Roswell story. I don't know about that one. I think that was more the 90s. But that's what Glenn Dennis was saying. And these women weren't even interested in it or talking about it. That's because the reason that they saw suction cups on the fingertips was because that's what was on the fingertips. Just like that was how the fingertips were described by that nurse who talked to Glenn Dennis back in 1947. So you can see it. It's all pretty obvious at this point, and you have to be pretty damn dumb to not realize that there's something here, and we're not alone, and they're doing things to us. They abduct human beings, and they for whatever purpose. A lot of people say it's for the hybridization program, and that's probably what it is. Whatever, but they're doing it against our will. That's what they're doing to the human race. This is something that needs to be coming up at these hearings, right? But here's what we're in. We're in the middle of this slow disclosure. I am very much looking forward to this hearing that's coming up. Obviously, right? I am very much interested in this subject. I am very much interested in the world facing the reality of the situation, right? But what's happened here? What we're talking. Recovered crap. We're going to be talking about a cover-up in the government, and we all know this. A lot of people who study this already know this. There's just too much evidence that leans in that direction. Let's just say it that way. But here's the thing. It's more than that. It's a lot deeper than that. The issue where the rubber really hits the road is, what are they doing to us personally? What is happening here? That's what we need to be talking about. That's the most important aspect of this. Of course, UFOs could potentially cause problems for aircraft in the sky, right? Of course, there's a issue with when they're floating around our military installations, or shutting down our nuclear missiles, or activating our nuclear missiles. Of course, that's a problem. But what are they doing to us? I think that is the bigger problem. That's the thing that we really need to be focusing on here. Anyway, yeah, at some point, right, here's what I got to say. At some point, right, we need to be talking in Congress more, not just about the issues that it's causing for the military, but there has to be, this discussion needs to be expanded, right? We need to talk about the beings themselves, as we now know, and we can prove, we have proved, we've shown, right? They are real. And what we see in that video that I keep talking about, right? Well, I'm not going to stop talking about it. What we see in that video is actual alien beings that meet the same kind of descriptions, right, as a lot of people who have been abducted over the years have provided to us. Just like these two women here. Now, apparently there weren't the tall insectoids. What these women are talking about is the taller grays, 5.5 foot tall grays, and shorter grays. That's what they're talking about here. And that's what we see. That's represented in that video. Right? Some people say they see more. Sometimes people say they see reptilians. It looks like that's represented in that video too. Right? And of course, the taller ones, the praying mantis style ones, the insectoid ones, of course, they're represented in that video too. The gang was all there. And it's time for the world to accept this. And this story here from 1989, again, it's 1989. Those two women had this experience, and all these decades have passed since then, and still, people are wondering whether it's real or not. Wake up! Anyway, I just want to say this. I want to say thank you all for joining me today. Until next time.